Back in 2019, I really started to just watch a lot more anime. So I would watch basically like whatever was suggested to me. So, I'm looking for the next thing to watch, and my friend says, yo, you should watch Erased. I had never heard of Erased before. I looked it up. I saw, 12 episodes. This is light work, easy binge. So back when I first watched it, I binged it and I loved it, except for the ending. So I thought maybe the first 9-10 episodes were like a masterpiece, and then the last 2 episodes were just not it at all. And some of my main complaints back then when I watched it were, how come Kaio went and had a kid with Satoru's friend? How come she became happy? How come he fell into a coma and didn't wake up for 15 years? And then I thought the way they caught the killer was really lame. I didn't mind who the killer was. I thought that was a good twist. I personally didn't see it coming, but I was just so upset by the ending. I remember being like, wow, Erased is going to be one of the best anime that every time I recommend to someone, I'm going to be like, oh, it's great, but I don't know about that ending. So fast forward to 2021, and nowadays I watch anime with my dad. So I will recommend the ones that I think he'll enjoy, and we'll watch it together. We'll watch 3 episodes a night, whatever. So Erased came to mind, and I was like, you know what? I didn't really like the ending, but overall I think he'll like this anime. So we watched Erased, and yet again, those first 9-10 episodes, I'm just like, wow, this anime is just so good. Everyone needs to watch this anime. It's intense. It has some of the most heartwarming scenes you'll see in anime, some of the most intense scenes. The plot is not too complicated, but it's super interesting. They're great characters. Everything that you could like is in this anime, right? Then I got to the last 2 episodes, and I'm watching, and I started to think to myself, I was like, this isn't actually as bad as I thought it was. So I decided to make this video kind of just to say that rewatching Erased changed my mind on the ending. Because, like I said, the first time I watched it, I was really upset about 3 main things. Kaio, what they did with the killer, and the coma, right? So the first point, Kaio. So when I rewatched the show, when we got to episode I think it was 7 or 8, maybe 9, but I'm pretty sure it's 7. At that point, Kaio kind of exits the show. He has saved Kaio from the danger that she was in, and there's really not much more for her story. It's just he saved her from her abusive household, and he saved her from dying, right? She goes off. Yes, they did have this cute relationship thing going, but at the same time, he was still technically 29 in a 10-year-old's body, so he didn't want to get with her anyway. So the first time I watched it, I was so caught up in the fact that they had that cute little relationship while they were 5th graders that when we fast forwarded to the present and she now has a kid and is happy, I was upset because I was like, wow, you're happy, but the main character should have been with you. But when I rewatched it, Kaio had been gone for 2 or 3 episodes. She was completely removed while he was still in the past. And then fast forward to the present, it's 15 years later. Kaio, like she says to him, she's eternally grateful for the fact that he saved her life and he made it so that she could have a happy life. But at the same time, she moved away. People change, people grow over time. So it really does make sense that Kaio would have moved on. For him, it's been 10 minutes since he was last awake, and maybe a month since he saw Kaio. But for her, it's been 15 years where she went off and lived her own happy life. Yes, she ended up marrying his friend, but at the same time, that's okay. I don't know why I was so upset looking back. I think it was really childish for me to be as upset as I was when it comes to the whole Kaio thing. Because, like I said, she was gone. She moved on. It's perfectly fine. And even though she moved on, she stayed entirely grateful to him the entire time. I think that actually was the most appropriate ending for Kaio, right? So the second point was the killer, right? So when they revealed the killer as the teacher, I was like, whoa. Because personally, I did kind of think that like, oh, he's like a little suspicious. But then when we got to the part where the teacher helps save Kaio with Satoru, and Satoru's thinking like, wow, I don't remember my dad, but this guy's like as close to a dad as I'll ever get. Like, I personally fell for that hook, line, and sinker, right? Because I was like, wow, he's actually a good guy. I don't know why I was so suspicious. This is great, whatever. Then they had the candy scene where Satoru like opens his glove compartment and like the candy falls out and he's like, oh, you got me. And I was like, oh, what is this? And he was like, oh yeah, I used to smoke. Now I eat candy. Like, I've seen tons of TV shows or anime, whatever, where like a smoker has like this weird habit now that they've quit smoking. Holes, the Disney movie, like the guy quit smoking and now he just eats like 1 trillion sunflower seeds. So I was like, okay, that's not too out of the ordinary. Cool. So when they revealed it, it really did like throw me off. Now, I was really annoyed with the way they caught him, right? Like the fact that he kind of like stuck around for 15 years waiting, but rewatching it kind of makes sense because they even go to the lengths of, in the beginning of episode 11, like he kind of explains, we get to hear a little bit of his perspective of like how he became the person he became. He became obsessed with, snapping the thread of death above people's heads, right? And so we get to hear his perspective, right? And then when they're on the roof and they're talking, he explains that like after Satoru like went under the water and his last words were like, I know your future, it threw Yashiro off so much that he literally lost his impulse to kill. I don't think that's too unreasonable, right? The other thing is, of course he would have waited for Satoru to wake up. Even if it wasn't out of obsession, it would have been to get rid of the evidence. So even in the original timeline, he had become like this big figure. So in the new timeline, him being a big figure still adds up. That doesn't break the story. The fact that he was waiting for Satoru to wake up doesn't really break the story. Him being obsessive, I think that makes sense because he's already a serial killer, like obsessed with like hunting down these kids and taking their lives out. So all we have is an obsessive killer who stayed obsessive so that he could get rid of the evidence. That's perfectly reasonable. So the second point where I was just so upset that like he stuck around waiting for Satoru and they caught him in like a corny way, it's a lot less corny now that I think about it, especially because of Kenya, who was Satoru's friend as a kid. That kid was always too smart for this show, right? Like he gave off such like Killua energy. Like he was always observing everything. And the fact that Kenya like stuck around, became a lawyer, was working with like the reporter to help catch the killer. Once Satoru told him, of course they were going to come up with a plan to stop him in a way that would get around Japan's statute of limitations. So that's another point where I think that it's perfectly okay the way they ended it. Then there's the third point, him falling into a coma. So I remember being like really annoyed that he fell into a coma because I was just like, that's such a lame cop out of an ending. We don't get to see what happens. But even in like the original timeline where Yashiro manages to kill the 3 girls, move on to the next town, we don't get to see any of that. So it's not like we were going to get to see any of that anyway. And then the other thing is, this was the most reasonable way to explain him returning to the present, because he had only done revival in like short bursts, right? In the first episode, we see that like he goes back like 2-3 minutes, if that. It was like 30 seconds. He has to look around, assess the situation, and fix it right then and there. This revival sent him back years in his life, but we don't like know how powerful revival is. Is it the type of thing that like shatters timelines? Does it rewrite time? How does it work, right? So if, let's say, he catches the killer in the past, life's good, whatever, he jumped back to the present, that should be an entirely different life for him. But by them writing it this way, where he falls into the coma and the killer stays close to him. He wakes up, he's able to catch the killer. Now he's able to kind of fall into what would have been his present life. That is actually a pretty valid way to explain things in my eyes. I obviously would have preferred that he didn't fall into a coma, but I think that within the scope of this show, it actually really does add up that this was just the way for him to get to the present. Because in the original timeline, like, all the parents got together and they made it so that the kids would forget the killer, and that impacted each one of them in their own way, I'm sure. And, you know, he goes on to live his life, does this, XYZ, ends up where he was in life, right? But now there was no killer. So there's 3 more people who should have disappeared living on this earth. You know, Yashiro is living a completely different life. All of these things have changed, meaning who knows what path he would have ended up on if he was awake, right? And then if you want to say, oh, but once he caught the killer, he would have jumped back to the present. What would the present be like when he jumped back to it if he already caught the killer, right? It almost creates like one of those like paradox, where it's like he went back because his mom got killed so that he could catch the killer who kills the kids, who then kills his mom to hide the evidence. But if he catches the killer, his mom doesn't die, so what's the reason for him to go to the past? You know? So I feel like the way it was written actually was pretty solid. So personally, I think I crapped all over Erased's ending a bit too much the first time I watched it. Rewatching it just made me notice that it was just as good of an anime as I remembered, but I had like dropped its score that I gave it because I didn't like its ending. Now that I rewatched it, I think that it actually has a pretty good ending that ties up everything that needed to be tied up pretty damn well. So that's my re-review of Erased. I never made an original review, but now that I've rewatched it, I just wanted to bring up those 3 points and point out why I think that Erased actually had a good ending.